It was supposed to be the perfect camping trip. I mean, it was just me and my buddies, out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees, fresh air, and the quiet of nature. The kind of trip you go on to escape the chaos of everyday life. We had all the usual camping gear, snacks, and some drinks. Nothing fancy, but enough to get us through a couple of nights under the stars. We'd planned it for weeks, picked a spot near a lake, and everything seemed perfect. I remember driving out there, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows over the winding road. The kind of road you wouldn't even find on a map, the one that only locals knew about. A place to really get away. We joked about how the spot was so isolated, it was the ideal place for ghost stories and a few laughs. Little did we know, we'd end up living one of those stories. When we arrived, it was already dusk. We set up camp with ease, the fire crackling in front of us, filling the air with that smoky smell you only get when you're deep in the woods. We cracked open some beers, and everyone settled in, talking about random stuff, trying to make the usual campfire chatter last as long as possible. It was a calm night, the stars hanging above us like 1,000 tiny eyes. But there was something about the place, a kind of stillness that I couldn't shake. You know how, sometimes, when you're in a place that feels too quiet, it almost becomes unnatural? That's how it felt. Like the world had stopped breathing, just for a second. I didn't mention it to the guys, though. I didn't want to be that guy. You know, the one who starts acting weird because they heard a twig snap or saw something move in the corner of their eye. But then, after a while, something strange started happening. The night was getting deeper, the shadows longer, and the forest, once so peaceful, felt alive. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but every now and then, I'd hear something faint, like a whisper carried by the wind. I thought it was the wind at first, or maybe one of the guys messing around, but when I turned to look, everyone was either staring into the fire or talking among themselves. No one else seemed to hear it. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. My voice probably came off way too shaky for someone who was just asking about the wind. Everyone paused, staring at me like I was crazy. "Hear what?" Mark, my best friend, asked with a laugh. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was nothing, but the whispering didn't stop. If anything, it got louder, like something or someone was trying to get my attention. And it wasn't just a voice, it was more like a murmuring, a series of low, unintelligible sounds that seemed to circle the campfire. That was when I started to feel that wrongness in the air. I told myself to relax. Maybe it was just the stress from the long drive and the excitement. Maybe it was the quiet, messing with my head. But then, just as I was starting to convince myself I was overreacting, I saw it, a shadow. It was just a flicker at first, like something passing between the trees, but it was too fast, too quick for anything natural, like an animal or a person. And it wasn't the shadows of the trees either. This thing was different. It was darker, shifting in a way that didn't belong. I stood up, the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. Mark noticed, his voice dropping low. "You okay, man?" I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. The truth, that something was out there, watching us. I tried to focus on the fire, but the whispers grew louder, and that damn shadow kept moving. At first I thought it was just me, maybe I was going crazy or something, but then I saw Mark staring at the same spot, his face pale, his eyes wide. Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, what the hell is that?" No one else had noticed, but the air felt different, thick, like the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. And that's when the wind picked up. It was like the forest was alive, the trees shaking with the force of it. The fire flickered and danced, casting eerie shadows across our faces. It felt like something was moving in the dark, just beyond the reach of the flames. We all jumped when a branch cracked in the distance. "All right, screw this," Mark said, standing up. "Let's head to the tent. It's getting late anyway." But I didn't move. I couldn't. I felt rooted to the spot, the whispers, the shadows, the wind. It was all too much. It was as if the forest itself was drawing us in, telling us to stay. I glanced over at the guys, and they were already packing up the fire, not noticing how quiet I had become. But I couldn't stop looking into the trees, into the dark. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall, cloaked in black, standing just at the edge of the clearing. I didn't even blink. My heart stopped. It was real. I could feel it, deep in my bones. The thing was watching us, and it wasn't the kind of watchfulness that made you feel safe. It was the kind that made you want to run and never stop. Before I could say anything, the figure turned and disappeared into the darkness, like it was part of the night itself. I don't know how long I stood there, staring after it, but when I turned back to the guys, they were already packing up the last of the gear, oblivious to everything that had just happened. "Hey, what's up? You good?" Mark asked, noticing my stillness. I swallowed hard, trying to push the image of the figure out of my mind. "Yeah," I said. Just a little tired, I guess." We finished packing up the camp, and I didn't say a word about what I'd seen. I didn't think anyone would believe me anyway. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something wasn't right about that place, and I had a bad feeling that we weren't alone out there. As we trudged back to the tent, the forest around us seemed to close in, the whispers still echoing in my mind. And no matter how many times I told myself it was just my imagination, I couldn't shake the feeling that the thing was still watching, and it wasn't done with us yet. We huddled together in the tent, the night wrapping around us like a suffocating blanket. The wind had died down, but that eerie feeling hadn't left me. I couldn't shake the images of the shadow, the figure standing in the darkness, its cold eyes locked on us. I tried to push it all to the back of my mind, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. After all, we were out in the woods, and the mind plays tricks when it's isolated, right? Mark, Mike, and Alex were all laughing, passing around a flashlight and talking about the best places to camp next summer. The sound of their voices was a comforting distraction, but it couldn't fully drown out the silence that seemed to stretch beyond the tent. I forced myself to smile and join the conversation, but it was all fake. Inside, I felt like I was suffocating. The whispers that had followed me from the clearing kept creeping into my thoughts, like an old friend reminding me that I wasn't alone. Every now and then, I'd hear a faint rustling outside the tent, a twig snapping, a footstep, soft but distinct. I knew I wasn't imagining it, but I didn't want to be the one to bring it up. Not again. I just had to wait until morning, right? Surely by daylight everything would seem normal again. Maybe we'd laugh about it, chalk it up to a weird night in the woods. But when I lay down to sleep, the feeling of being watched never left me. My eyes kept darting toward the entrance of the tent, where the shadows seemed to move in ways they shouldn't. Every creak of the trees, every gust of wind, made my heart race. I was being ridiculous. There was nothing out there. Nothing but the wilderness, right? I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. It was like my mind was too alert, too aware of the world around me. The air inside the tent grew thicker, colder, despite the fire being out. I could feel the chill against my skin, creeping up my arms and legs. I pulled the sleeping bag tighter around me, hoping it would help, but it didn't. Suddenly, I heard it. A whisper, soft like a breath against my ear. I froze, my blood running cold. "Help me," it said. It wasn't one of the guys. I knew their voices too well. This voice was low, hoarse, like it hadn't spoken in years. It sounded desperate. I felt it more than I heard it, like the words were crawling into my skull, burrowing into my mind. I shot up, my heart pounding in my chest. The tent was still. silent except for my own rapid breathing. I looked around, expecting to see one of the guys awake, but they were all still asleep. Mark's snoring was the only sound in the otherwise still air. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to no one in particular. No one responded. I thought I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a dream, right? But that voice, it was too real. It had come from inside the tent. I had no explanation for it, but I couldn't ignore it. Then the whispers started again. Low at first, like they were just on the edge of hearing, but gradually growing louder. They weren't just in my head anymore. They were outside the tent now, like something was circling us, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Help me. Help me." The voice had become frantic now, desperate. My pulse was racing, every muscle in my body on edge. I slowly, cautiously unzipped the corner of the tent, peering out into the blackness. My flashlight was lying on the ground outside, but the light barely pierced the darkness. The trees stood like silent giants, their branches swaying in the breeze. But there was something else, something moving just beyond the reach of the light. A figure. Not the same one as before, but something just as tall, just as dark. It wasn't human. I could tell that much. The shape was wrong, too elongated, too off. I couldn't make out details, but I could feel it watching, waiting. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady my breath, telling myself it wasn't real. It couldn't be real, but when I opened them again, the figure was closer. "Get back in the tent," I hissed under my breath, but no one heard me. No one was awake. I was alone, trapped in a nightmare, and no one knew. I zipped the tent back up quickly, my hands shaking. I glanced around at the guys, but they were still sound asleep, oblivious to the terror outside. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let whatever that thing was get closer, but I couldn't leave either. Not alone. I grabbed my phone from my bag, my hands trembling as I dialed Mark's number, hoping to wake him up. It rang and rang, but he didn't pick up. Of course he didn't. He was snoring like a freight train. The whispers grew louder, and I realized something. It wasn't just one voice anymore. There were many, dozens, maybe hundreds, all speaking at once, all whispering the same words. "Help me! Help me!" The voices grew frantic, as if they were all trapped in the same place, calling for salvation that would never come. I could hear them now, right outside the tent. Every breath they took, every desperate plea, pierced through the thin fabric. I wanted to scream, to get the guys up, but I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. My mind was a jumble of thoughts and images, all racing too fast to make sense of. I don't know how long I sat there, trapped in that small space, listening to the growing chorus of whispers, but eventually something changed. The ground beneath us rumbled, a low grating sound that made my stomach twist in on itself. It was like the earth itself was shifting, moving under our feet. I could feel the vibrations through the tent walls. Then, with a sudden force, the whispering stopped. I didn't know what that meant, but deep down, I knew it wasn't good. The stillness that followed was worse than any noise. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, the kind that only happens when something terrible is about to happen. And that's when it hit me. It was coming for us. I reached over and shook Mark awake. His eyes snapped open, still bleary from sleep, but he could see the fear in my eyes. "Dude, what the hell's going on?" he asked, groggily sitting up. "I think something's out there," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Something not right." He froze, sensing the urgency in my tone. "What do you mean? Like a bear or something?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "Number something worse." Before Mark could respond, we heard it. A sharp crack, like a tree branch snapping, but this time it was closer, much closer. I grabbed his arm. "Get up! Now!" Mark's face went pale as he scrambled to his feet. His mind was still trying to process what I had just said, but there was no time for explanations. No time to reason. The crack from the forest echoed again, this time louder, closer. It was unmistakable. Something, someone was out there, and they weren't interested in making friends. I grabbed the flashlight and flicked it on, casting its weak beam into the blackness beyond the tent. The beam barely reached the tree line, but the darkness seemed to push back against it, thick and suffocating. It felt like something was closing in on us, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. "Mike! Alex!" Mark called. His voice panicked as he shook the others awake. "Wake up! Something's out there!" Alex groggily stirred, still half asleep. "What the hell, dude? It's probably just a deer or something." But Mike, ever the skeptic, immediately tensed up. "No, man, that's not just a deer." His voice was low and serious. "I heard it, too." The three of them stood up quickly now, the sleep gone from their eyes. They could feel it, too. The air was thick with tension, the silence between us screaming louder than any words. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I glanced around the camp, hoping to spot some sign of what was lurking out there, but there was nothing, no movement. Just the stillness of the woods, the trees swaying in the wind, and that bone-chilling sense that we were being watched, the way the shadows twisted unnaturally, like they were waiting for us to make a move, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Where should we go?" Mike asked, his voice low. "We can't stay here." I swallowed hard. He was right. The fire was out, and the tent offered no real protection. Our chances of making it through the night felt slimmer with every passing second. But running into the woods blindly wasn't an option either. "We need to stick together," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Let's grab the gear and head to the lake. It's our best bet. At least we can see if anything approaches." We moved quickly, packing up what we could in a frenzy, the sound of rustling bags and crunching leaves louder than it had any right to be. We didn't dare speak any more than we had to. Every word felt like it might attract whatever was out there, whatever was waiting for us in the dark. The forest had fallen into a deep, unnatural silence again, but that didn't ease the tension. If anything, it made it worse. I reached for the tent poles and began disassembling it, working as fast as I could. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. The sense of urgency was overwhelming. I could feel the sweat on the back of my neck, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the poles. The others were doing the same, though they were clearly as shaken as I was. We were all aware of how close whatever was out there was to us. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure, just at the edge of the camp, standing between the trees, its form blending into the night. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. It was too tall, too elongated, its features too dark to make out, but I could feel it deep in my gut, the same oppressive feeling from before. The figure wasn't just standing there, it was watching us, waiting. I froze and my blood ran cold. "Guys," I whispered, barely able to form the words, "we're not alone." Mark, Mike, and Alex turned to look in the direction I was pointing, their faces pale as they followed my gaze. They didn't need any more confirmation. They saw it too. The figure didn't move, didn't react at all. It just stood there, in the shadows, observing us like we were nothing more than prey. "We need to move," Mark said, his voice steady but tinged with fear. "Now!" We didn't hesitate. We grabbed what we could carry and bolted. No one said a word as we ran through the underbrush, the sound of our feet crunching on the leaves as loud as thunder in the otherwise silent forest. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could hear the others breathing heavily behind me, but we didn't stop. I didn't know how far we ran, but the lake seemed like a distant dream, an impossible goal in the vast, shadowy wilderness. The whispers had started again. Soft at first, like they were just beyond hearing, but then they grew louder, like they were coming from all directions. The woods were closing in on us. The trees seemed to stretch taller, their limbs reaching out like claws, and we knew we weren't supposed to be here. Whatever had been watching us wasn't going to let us leave without a price. "Come on," I shouted, my voice cracking with panic as we pushed forward. "We're almost there." We broke through the last line of trees and found ourselves at the edge of the lake, the moonlight reflecting off the still water. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, and for a second I thought maybe we were safe. But as soon as we stopped, we realized we were wrong. The figure was no longer standing at the edge of the woods. It was here. It was standing just at the water's edge, its tall, gaunt form outlined by the moon. It wasn't moving. It didn't need to. The water around it rippled unnaturally, like it was shifting with every movement it made, every breath it took. The figure turned its head slowly toward us, and I could feel its eyes on me. Cold, empty eyes that seemed to see me deeper than anyone should be able to. "Run!" Mark screamed, but it was too late. As soon as the words left his mouth, the thing took a step forward, a long step, as if it were gliding over the ground. And then the whispers exploded, filling the air around us, surrounding us like a chorus of trapped souls. They weren't words anymore. They were screams, screams of agony, of desperation, of something so old and so evil that the sound of it felt like it was tearing at my soul. I turned to run, but the water was in the way, and that's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, right behind me. It was coming for me. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't, but I could hear it. The thing, its breath ragged and strained, getting closer, and I could feel it too. The pull of its presence, drawing me in, suffocating me with every step I took. My body was screaming to stop, but I kept running. My legs were burning, my lungs on fire, but I couldn't stop. Not with that thing so close. Then I tripped. I fell hard on the ground, the dirt scraping my hands, the cold, wet earth biting into my skin. I turned over just in time to see it. It, towering above me, its shadow swallowing me whole. Its face, if you could even call it that, was distorted, like a nightmare come to life. Its mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, sharp teeth, and then it spoke. "Help me," it whispered, but it wasn't a plea for help. It was a command, an order, and that's when I realized we weren't meant to escape. We were never meant to leave this place. The words, it was almost like they were a poison seeping into my mind, drowning me in a sense of dread so deep that I could barely breathe. Help me. It wasn't just the figure saying it. The voices, those tortured whispers, were all around me now, as if they were coming from the very earth beneath my hands. Help me. Help me. They kept repeating, growing louder, pressing against my skull like a vice. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I couldn't even move. It was like my limbs were made of stone. My heart was pounding in my chest, a frantic, terrified drumbeat, but no matter how hard I tried to tear my eyes away from that thing, I couldn't. It stood over me, its silhouette darker than the night itself, its jagged, hollow eyes locked onto mine, pulling me in. And then, slowly, the thing bent down, its twisted, inhuman face hovering inches from mine. I could smell the rot on its breath, decay, like it hadn't been alive in centuries. The smell was overpowering, gagging me. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I might pass out from the sheer terror. But it didn't bite, it didn't strike, it just stayed there, looming, its mouth opening wider and wider, like it was going to devour me whole. And that's when I understood. It wasn't after me. I wasn't the prey. I wasn't the one it wanted. I was just the next in line, part of the ritual, a pawn to the thing that had been lurking in these woods for who knows how long. I had read about things like this, old legends, whispers of spirits, or entities that were bound to certain places, to certain lands. They had to feed, they had to claim what was theirs, and we had wandered too far, ventured too close to the heart of the curse. We were the offering, the sacrifice, the price of disturbing the land that should have been left undisturbed. The thing took another step toward me, its breath hot against my face now, and I felt the darkness closing in. The whispers grew into one unified voice, a chorus of pain and torment. Suddenly, I heard shouting, "Mark, Mike, Alex!" They were screaming, their voices sharp with panic, but they were fading, drowned out by the chaos in my head. I tried to call out, to warn them, but my throat was dry. Nothing came out. They didn't understand yet. They didn't know that they were all just as trapped as I was. They didn't know the thing wasn't going to let any of us leave. Then, as if something shifted in the air, a loud crash echoed from the trees. A tree falling. The ground beneath me trembled again, a deep, resonating pulse that shook my very bones. The thing paused, its head tilting slightly to the side as if listening. It turned slowly, its attention momentarily diverted, and that's when I saw it. Another figure, just behind the creature, a shape, smaller but still impossibly tall, emerging from the dark like a shadow in motion. It was moving with purpose, gliding forward, and I knew this was no accident. The second figure wasn't like the first, where the first had been tall and skeletal. This one was human-shaped, but with features distorted in a way I couldn't quite comprehend. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes burned with a fiery, unnatural glow. I couldn't see its face clearly, but the malice that radiated from it was unmistakable. The thing from the trees. It wasn't the same. It was worse. The second figure spoke, its voice soft, chilling, but somehow louder than the whispers of the woods. "Leave him alone." The first figure, the creature, snarled, a low growl vibrating through the ground. It shifted in place, stepping away from me, but I couldn't tell if it was retreating or preparing for something more terrible. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that the new figure had intervened. Mark's voice reached my ears then, sharp and frantic. "What the hell is going on?" I turned my head to see them, the guys, Mike, Mark, Alex, running toward me, their faces filled with fear, but none of them stopped. They were too close, too far past the point of understanding. They couldn't see what was happening. The darkness, the curse, it was all around us, but they didn't know that yet. They were still in the game, still unaware. "Stop!" I managed to croak, though my voice felt like it was breaking. Don't come any closer." But they didn't stop. They were too far gone, too lost in their own terror, and I couldn't stop them. I didn't have the strength. The second figure, the savior or the deceiver, extended a hand, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Its fingers seemed to shift in the air, curling like smoke, and as it did, the first creature, the one with hollow eyes, snarled again, louder this time, more feral, as if it had been angered beyond control. Before I could even register what was happening, the creature leaped, the darkness descended, and in that instant, everything went silent. The next thing I knew, the lake was in front of me. The water was cold against my skin. I didn't remember falling. I didn't remember anything except the chill. I was awake. Or was I? I couldn't tell anymore. The night was still, completely still. And then I saw them, Mark, Mike, Alex. They were standing at the water's edge. But they were different now. Their faces were empty, hollow. They weren't my friends anymore. They were just empty shells. The second figure, whatever it was standing behind them, its gaze locked onto me. Its voice echoed in my mind. "Now you understand," it whispered. "You can never leave." I couldn't breathe. The weight of the moment crushed me, suffocating me with its awful reality. My friends, they were standing there, staring at me with vacant eyes. No fear, no recognition, just emptiness. The second figure, the one who had intervened or perhaps manipulated us from the start, stood behind them like a puppeteer, its long, spindly fingers curling in the air, directing them. It was clear now, it had never come to help. It had come to take. I stumbled backward, my hands slick with sweat. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The lake was still, like a mirror, reflecting the moonlight, but I couldn't escape the feeling that the world around me was shifting, warping into something I didn't understand. I started, my voice trembling, barely above a whisper. What have you done to them? The figure stepped closer, its translucent skin glowing faintly. Its eyes burned with that fiery light, and its lips, thin like cracks in the earth, twisted into a grin. They are no longer yours, it said softly, its voice like the sound of wind through dead leaves. They belong to me now. I could barely comprehend what it meant. I wanted to shout, to beg for them to return, but I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat, trapped by the overwhelming dread. The figure wasn't just a monster. It was something far worse. It was a force, ancient and evil, tied to this place, this land, the lake, the woods, the mountain. They were all part of it, and now we were too. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice breaking. The figure tilted its head, studying me almost curiously. Want? It repeated, as if the concept was foreign to it. I do not want. I take. You are the final piece. I froze, my blood running cold. The final piece? The figure's grin widened. You do not understand, but you will. Its gaze flicked to my friends, still standing motionless at the water's edge. They are the offering. You are the sacrifice. I felt my stomach twist, the weight of its words sinking deep into my bones. It wasn't just our lives it wanted. It wasn't just taking us for food or power. It was taking our souls. Each one of us had become part of the curse, part of the ritual. And now I was the final piece that would complete it. I backed away, my legs shaking. I needed to escape, but I couldn't. The lake was behind me, the woods to my sides. There was nowhere left to run. And with each step I took, the thing was closer. It was always closer. A flicker of movement caught my eye. Mark, no, not Mark. The empty shell of Mark, the soulless husk that had once been my friend, was moving toward me, slowly, mechanically, like a puppet. His eyes were dead, empty. No recognition, no trace of humanity left in them. He reached out with a hand that looked too stiff, too deliberate. It was too late. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder before I even realized what was happening. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I turned to face the thing, that hollow smile still stretching across its face. You were always meant to come here, it whispered, the words like poison in my ear. You just didn't know it. And then everything went dark. I awoke, but not where I expected. The world around me had shifted again, or maybe it hadn't. Maybe it was always this way, and I was too blind to see it. The air was thick with mist, swirling around me like something alive. I could barely make out shapes in the gloom, twisted, jagged shapes that loomed in every direction. The trees were no longer trees, they were massive, gnarled things, their bark blackened and peeling. The air was suffocating, the ground beneath me soft and wet. But it wasn't the earth anymore, it was something else. I stood up, my head pounding, my legs unsteady. The figure was gone, but its presence still lingered, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. I wanted to call out, to scream for Mark, for Mike, for Alex, but I knew they were gone. They were never going to answer. The whispers were back, soft at first, but growing louder with every passing second. They filled the air, seeped into my mind until I could hear them in my bones. You should not have come. You should not have stayed. You cannot leave. I walked. I had to. There was nothing else to do. The mist pressed in around me, heavy, thick. I stumbled, my mind racing, searching for some way out, but there was nothing. The trees closed in, their branches twisting like fingers, and the ground felt wrong beneath me. It was no longer solid earth. It felt like something was alive under the surface, something watching, waiting, and then I saw it, a shape, half hidden by the mist, a figure. It was standing in front of me, watching me. Its silhouette was dark, but its eyes, I could feel them. They burned with that same unnatural light, and the whispers grew louder. "Run," it said. "You cannot stay." I backed away, heart pounding in my chest, but it was too late. The thing lunged faster than I could react, and in that instant I knew I wasn't just running from the creature, I was running from everything, from the curse of this place, from the land that claimed us all. I felt my body shudder as something cold, something dark, gripped my heart. The last thing I heard before the world went silent was the voice of the second figure, echoing in my mind. "You are the price.